And so it was developing my faith rather than just telling me stories.
I think good parents, godly parents, they really do want to disciple.
And as a parent now, I know what it's like to say, oh man, I don't want to share this with my kids because what if things go sideways?
Welcome back to the Patros Podcast. As we embrace healthy masculinity, we have been going through Theology for Regular Dudes. My name is Allan Pereira, and this is Jeff Ford, our CEO.
Hey.
And as you can see, today's platform is a little bit different, the way that we set everything up, and we have a guest with us, but I'll go ahead and let Jeff introduce him.
Yeah, I'm happy to introduce him. I'm excited because not only the topic, but that we're doing this, we're able to actually connect with somebody across
that they don't have to fly in.
Yeah, not to fly in to be in the studio with us. So, man, Santosh, I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name, and I know that you are gracious because you've had that your whole life. But let me give the backdrop before we kind of go into who you are and everything. So a couple months back, I had the privilege, and Santosh had the privilege of meeting in Washington, D.C., and we were both invited by different people to a fatherhood summit. And this fatherhood summit was awesome. I mean, I don't want to oversell it, but I thought it was awesome. There were maybe 12 of us or so?
Yeah, 11 guys.
11 guys. And so we met in Washington, D.C., and it's put together by our friend Jeff Zog, who runs Dad Awesome, and who's now actually in Florida. He wasn't. Where was he originally, Santosh? I can't remember.
That's a great question. I know he's traveled all over. I heard so many places. I don't remember where the starting point was.
Oh, Minnesota. Yeah, I think he was from Minnesota.
That sounds right.
Originally, because I feel like 5 or 6 of those guys are from Minnesota, and they're all connected to Jeff. But anyway, we got to hang out at Mark Batterson's church, and Mark Batterson was a part of those conversations, and so that was a privilege. Super gracious to us as our host, and we had, guys just that are in the fatherhood space. Ken started Canefield Wright, started the National Fatherhood Initiative. So many great guys just doing amazing work. I'm already halfway.
That picture that you sent the group? Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I'm halfway through Chris's book on Man Maker. So shout out to him. And we just had a great time. It was about 72 hours ish, and or a little less. And really got to connect with Santosh, and I'll let you do all the introduction. But for those who are joining us for the first time on the Patros Podcast, Patros is a Greek word for father, and kind of all about fathers and dads and men being engaged in the home, but it's so much more than that. It gives the idea of this ancestor or this wise man of the room. It's kind of the guy in the room who, man, when you're not sure what to do, you go to this guy and you pass that wisdom on to the next generation. That's what this podcast is really about. We want to see men doing that. We want to see them doing it in their community, but they can't do it in their community until they're doing it in their home.
Amen.
Yeah.
So that is what today's topic is going to be on. So as Allan mentioned, we're in this series, Theology for Regular Dudes, and the topic today is family discipleship. How do we disciple our family? And I could not think of a better person than you to go down this road, Santosh. But before we do, man, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you, man? Give us your background.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for the kind introduction. And for me, my background, I was born and raised in Orange County, California. My parents are Indian immigrants. And my journey with Jesus started when I was pretty young. I had both my parents teaching me from a young age about Jesus, and that had such a substantial impact in my life. Even my grandparents on my mom's side, who were alive when I was young and even stayed with us, lived with us, they taught me so much. My grandfather started the very first Foursquare church in all of India after a career in the Indian Army. He gave up being a general to be a pastor, and that was an inspiration for me. My father, he was a tent-making missionary, meaning that he earned a living with real estate and other things, and he would go on missions back to India. My mom, she started the very first medically based crisis pregnancy center in the nation almost 40 years ago. And so I sort of had a good legacy. And what I realized how much that affected me, to the point where my journey was I was leading ministries since high school. Over 20 years I've been leading ministries, and by God's grace. But I was an engineer by education, and my passion though was always ministry. So I was a pastor, a missionary, and most recently been married now for we just had our 15-year anniversary, and my wife Christy and I now have 7 kids. The oldest is 12, the youngest is 2.
That's a crazy ratio, bro. It's 15 years, 7 kids.
Yeah, so is that one for 2 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had them all coming out pretty quick. I mean, all of them not even 2 years apart. But when we started having kids is when I really got serious about looking at this idea that you brought up of family discipleship. And it really hit me hard, really trying to think through what that means and how important it really is. So I know I sort of talked a little bit about my background, but that's what led me into as a pastor, and then even now in a nonprofit, as we are equipping churches and schools, private schools, to be primary partners of parents, to be the primary disciplers of their kids.
Yeah, it's such an important topic, and I'm excited to chat with you about it. I'd love to hear just your upbringing. I mean, what an amazing legacy, right? And I can see how that may be even tough to live up to. But I'm just wondering, what did that discipleship look like for you as you were growing up? Like, how did you receive it?
That's a great question. You know, my parents, they didn't take me through, hey, here's our discipleship course. They didn't say, here's our official program. But it was, as people say, you have much more that is caught than is taught. When they say that, they're talking about as you see it lived out, it makes a greater impact than just what is said. Now, I actually agree that what is said is important. There are a lot of key elements to it. I think the most important, what I would say, is that my parents showed me a real faith, and they brought it home. When I saw, whether we went through financial struggles at times, they didn't hide it from us. And as a parent now, I know what it's like to say, oh, man, I don't want to share this with my kids because what if things go sideways? But it takes faith, for instance, to say, look, we're going to enter into this as a family and pray through this, unknowing at this side how God is going to work this out. Because what that does is it allows our kids, this is what my parents imparted to me, it was allowing me to partake in faith and see the fruit of that as well. And so it was developing my faith rather than just telling me stories. And by the way, stories are important. That's a critical part of discipleship as well. It's telling the stories of faith. But that other component that I saw from my parents that was really helpful was them allowing us to see the struggle before we see the result of what God does. That's one thing. We had missionaries in our house all the time, no matter how much space we had, because we've had small places, but we always had people staying with us. So missionaries were not this foreign concept or this person in a book or in old times. They were aunties and uncles to me. And so when I got older, the opportunity to go on mission, that was one less barrier to overcome because it wasn't so distant. So, I mean, those are just a couple of those things. But of course, they talked about the word. They, like I said, in the way that they lived with finances, with time. I mean, all their talent, treasure, and time was an offering to God. And we saw it displayed from them as parents, but also as a family, we entered into that together.
Yeah, I mean, it's a blessing, man. I'm just thinking, Allan, I don't know about your upbringing, but I do know. So, but I don't know. Like, I grew up in a church, and I think my parents, my mom's folks were missionaries, like in the Philippines and in Africa.
Wow.
So they had that legacy. My dad's dad was a pastor. So there was kind of a legacy of faith, but I will tell you, man, I and this is not to dog on my parents. I love my parents so much, and they guided me. They put up kind of, I guess, like rails for me, maybe. But there was a lot of I don't know if modeling is the right word. I mean, they modeled by going to the church, right? But
would you say like intentional modeling?
I would say my mom told me this one time. I remember because I went to Wheaton College, and I remember telling her my freshman year I was in Bible class, New Testament maybe, and I was like, "Man, Mom, did you know that the Bible said all this?" And she's like, "Oh yeah." And then I'd like call her a week later and be like, you know, the Bible said all this? And she's like, what? Why don't you guys tell me any of this? Like, what are we doing here? It was a lot of like predestination stuff and like election. Yeah. I'm like, do you know the Bible said all this stuff? And she was like, well, yeah, kind of. I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me? Well, in her response, I remember her response. She said, well, we just kind of thought that you would get it through the church.
Mm.
Right? Like, we just kind of like,
make it be the church's, like, it's their responsibility.
Like we brought you faithfully, which they did.
Yeah,
I was there faithfully.
We just handed you off.
But it was kind of like they were trusting the church to do that. And, you know, I grew up in a Pentecostal faith, so, you know, the Pentecostal denomination, you're not going to get a lot on election.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, for the most part.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this, like, as I think back, and, you know, I love my parents, and I always say this, they did the best they could. I really believe that. And there's things that we can do better, right? Like we could continue to walk in that. So like for you, it was,
I mean, we were Catholic. So really we're like, what's it called? Nominally Catholic, which a lot of Catholics are, right? Where all we did was Easter, Christmas, and then maybe every now and then if you wanted to say thank you to God, or if you need services or help from the Catholic Church, you know. So that's really the relationship I had with God until I came to faith. So there wasn't, and then dad being absent doesn't help with family discipleship either.
Yeah.
So, but that then creates the obvious void of the need for God versus this, like, I can imagine how difficult it is for people that grow up in Christian homes or seemingly Christian homes where you assume that, my parents are disciples, but like you don't know that there's an obvious gap or void because you're being shuttled to church, and it's kind of just like they're dropping the ball at home. They're not intentional anywhere else. I can't imagine how hard that is for so many Christian kids, and which is why probably so many Christian kids struggle to stay in the church.
Yeah, and so like that's kind of where I want to like talk with you, Santosh, is about like that issue of, because we're seeing so many kids leave the faith. In the last 20 years, it indicates that we are losing about 70% of our children from the faith they once received once they leave high school.
Yeah,
that's tragic for a lot of levels. So maybe let's just start there. Like, why are we losing so many kids to the faith once they go to college?
Oh man, that's a heartbreaking statistic, and that actually hit me. It still hangs on me in a very deep way. And actually, the statistic is actually worse than that. According to Barna, only 10% of kids, only 10%, have a resilient faith when they get to their 20s. And so what that means, the statistic you talk about is, do they still associate themselves in some way with Christianity? Or maybe they're going to church. But the resilient followers means that they actually hold to the basic beliefs and lifestyle of a Christian. Not that they're leaders, not that they're actually pastors or anything like that, but that they actually hold to the basic beliefs. Only 10%.
Man.
So, and that sort of wrecked me. Why is that the case? I think there's a lot of reasons. I mean, there's been some research that's done on it. But if I were to give you my take on the simple answer, is that we're not discipling kids.
Yeah.
We're not doing enough to help kids find and follow Jesus. And while we actually in churches, broadly speaking, we do a lot to help them find Jesus. Here's what it means to follow Jesus, to say yes to Jesus. I think there's a lot of churches that have done a great job in articulating that gospel presentation. But the idea of following Jesus, it's a whole nother thing. And that's the discipleship part. I'll give you an example, and I think for a lot of people growing up, even for me, with a lot of great spiritual conversations and legacy, a lot of things poured into me, which I'm so grateful for. Even for me as a child, I remember around those tween years, between 10 to 13, really having a concept of, it is totally by God's grace that I'm saved. I went to even a Lutheran school, so we got a really good foundation of the grace of God, and it is 100% true. But here's one of the things that I struggled with, and I think a lot of people who grow up in faith have the same struggle. Okay, here's 100% grace. God did it all. I didn't earn it. But then on the other side, there's this idea of, well, I'm still supposed to read the Bible. I should be praying. I should understand spiritual disciplines. In order to be a good Christian, I need to do all of these things. And how do those two things really go together? And so one of the things that I've been working with my kids and some of the tools that we're developing is some of the language around that. A disciple, this is really funny to me. 2,000 years later, maybe it shouldn't be funny, but 2,000 years after the founding of the church, we still don't have a clear a community we all agree on definition of disciples. Oh. This is sort of a critical thing for the church, yet we don't have an agreed upon this is what discipleship is or what a disciple is. And I've borrowed language from other people, but one thing that I like is a 4-step or 4 pieces of it. Is a disciple is one who knows how to recognize God's voice, one who responds in obedience, one who grows in gifts and fruits of the Spirit, and one who helps others find and follow Jesus in the same way.
Okay.
And the reason I bring that up, just to recognize God's voice. If my goal is to be a follower of Jesus and I want to do what he's doing and recognize his voice, now I start understanding why I want to read the Bible, why I want to pray, why meditation and all those other things. It has a place for it. It's not for me to earn salvation. It's for me to understand how to draw close to the Savior that I love. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different components to that, but I think discipleship is very overwhelming to parents for good reason. I think you asked the question, why are so many kids walking away from their faith? I think it's almost an unfair burden, unrealistic to put it on the church, where on average, families go 1.5 times a month. And so if you add that up, what is that, about 18 to 20 hours at best a year? And we're expecting to form a child spiritually in their lifetime for that. I think it's unrealistic, because we're talking about learning about biblical literacy. How about doctrine and theology? When we talk about practical theology, apologetics, to truly form somebody, to just be ready to deal with the cultural immense current from high school so that they can survive it. Man, we're not doing enough to prepare them. We're throwing our kids out with a target on their back and without enough preparation to survive it.
Yeah, there was a Barna study. Let's see, it's a 2018 study that we found, and it was asking Christian parents, like, how important is it to you that your teen does X, Y, Z? And so, in thinking about, and this was this was engaged Christian parents, right? So 82% said that it was important that their teen developed a faith that lasts into adulthood. So first of all, that seems like a high number initially, but what Christian doesn't want their kid to have a faith that lasts into adulthood? Yeah. So I wasn't sure about that. 3% said that they want their teen to be equipped to explain the Christian faith. Mm. And again, I'm thinking, wow, only 6 and 10, or what is that, 3 and 5 want their teen to be equipped to be able to share their faith. I mean, that seems to be go and make disciples. That's if anything we know Jesus wanted us to do, it is to go and make disciples. Everybody knows Matthew 28 if they've been in the church at any, level, right? And the other one that I thought was interesting is that, 47%, it's important to them that their teen had a consistent quiet time. So I'm thinking, really, 1 in 2 parents want their kid to have a quiet time? Isn't that pretty foundational? Time spent with Jesus, time spent with God to grow in the relationship. So, in your experience in working with families and trying to, instill this idea of discipleship, what has been your, do you see those numbers? Does it kind of match that? Or what's the main objection that parents have to discipling their own kids?
Yeah. I think the objection for a lot of them is they don't even know what it is. Most adults have not been discipled. We're living in a time when the idea of discipleship, it's so foreign because we don't have an analog like there used to be. There used to be idea of mentorship, apprenticeship that was common throughout society. And you might call discipleship spiritual apprenticeship. That's one way to look at it. But we don't have that analog really anymore. Internships is maybe the closest thing, and those are notoriously not helpful to the person who's there. It's like, go get me some coffee type of a thing. And so it's not really for the formation of that person who's coming along, and we don't have that. So I think at the very starting point, many people don't know, again, the definition of what a disciple is. They've never been discipled. So the idea for them to disciple somebody, it's just completely foreign. And so for many parents, those types of questions that you brought up are probably more likely that they're saying, yeah, I want my kid to read the Bible. I want my kid to, be able to articulate their faith, because those are practical things and they don't know what disciple is. And again, if you even go back to those things, I don't know if there was a study done to show the correlation between what they want for their kids as it relates to how they live their lives. So for the ones that are saying 47%, I think you said, who want their kids to have a daily Bible time, how many of those parents actually have that? There's probably a pretty strong correlation, and probably for all of those, meaning I don't think many parents are doing that, and they're struggling with that because they have not been taught themselves.
Yeah. That's so good, because we see that, in the space where Man Up operates. We work with, young men who have aged out of the system of care, right? So they have grown up without a father in the home, without parents in the home, and now they're trying to navigate, how do I be an adult? If you have never seen a father emulate, or maybe it's been a long time since you've seen a father, or you haven't seen a someone who is acting like a father, right? A Patros, someone who's standing in that gap. You kind of go, well, you know what? Why would we expect them to act like a man if you don't know how to act like a man? Like, no one has ever taught you, and no one has shown you what it means to act like a man. So in some regard, you could say, well, it's not these people's fault if they've never seen it modeled. And yet at the same time, so I always tell my kids, I tell the young men we work with, listen, there are many things in your life that have brought you to this place for which you are not responsible. Like, it wasn't your fault. However, it is your responsibility to change what is in front of you. So what is behind you, so how do we do that? I mean, I'm just thinking practically, like you're talking about maybe even like an entire generation who doesn't know what it means to be discipled. Yeah. And so how would they know to disciple?
And I think that's also like churches, because the responsibility of churches to disciple the youth is a heavy burden. And I don't think it should be like they shouldn't be like soloed out or isolated to be the only people responsible to the discipleship of students. But I think where the lack is like the shepherds aren't doing life with the body. Like, you have a lot of shepherds that, like, you have a family pastor, but how's that family pastor supposed to be the pastor of 500 people and do life 500? No, like, you need your pastors and shepherds to be doing life. Because, you look at Jesus's model, right? He perfectly did life with 12. And so what we get is that trickling effect of, to make disciples is to also have been discipled. And
absolutely.
My question to you is, like, is that what you see is, like, is it the issue that families just don't feel equipped to disciple their kids, therefore they don't?
Absolutely. So the first part of it is the why. Most people don't know why. But then when you get into the how, now you're talking about people haven't been equipped. Ephesians 4 says that responsibility of the church, the leadership, it says apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers, is to equip. It is not actually to do all of the work, and it's not possible. And so for me, one of the big shifts, I've been involved in some of the largest churches in the country. I've been involved in small churches. I've seen the church structure. And one of the things that God has really been challenged, he's really challenged me in, is a radical shift in perspective of what the church is called to do. And let me put it this way. The role of the church is not to be the center of spiritual growth. I don't believe that. It is the home is meant to be the center of spiritual growth. And the church is the leadership of the church is meant to equip families and fathers and mothers to be those leaders in the home, to be the priest in their home.
Wow.
And that's a radical shift, because right now, the way it is in most places, you go on Sunday, that's where you get filled up. You got to sort of get that spiritual gas tank all the way topped up. And throughout the week, it's sort of just going down, and you hope you make it to Sunday again before you're tapped out. Maybe you go to a midweek study and you get boosted up again, and then it just sort of drains out.
This is like my life.
Yeah. Well, we've adopted the structure of the educational system, basically. It's my kids get educated by you there, and then I get to just do life with them.
Well, and by the way, we saw in one of the surveys, there was an express, kind of not concern, but a just feeling among parents that, hey, listen, I'm paying my tithes. You guys better be doing the work.
This is a membership fee.
Yeah. There's a lot of reasons for that we need to switch around. So rather than get into all of those reasons for it,
for sure.
Man, that is absolutely the case. And by the way, that's how people feel for missionaries too. They say, well, we pay for missionaries to go out, so I'm not supposed to be a missionary. Jeff, I'd love to hear even from your side. I'm sure you experienced that a lot. And that's what you're also working. I love what you're doing to work to change that perspective. But that's embedded in our church system in the way that we say, you pay and we go and do it, rather than we are the primary equippers. And here's a place in Scripture that really, I think, clarifies this. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And this is where the law was given to Moses. And this is, actually it's called the Great Shema from Jewish culture. This is like the great command. Jesus referred to it as the greatest command, to love the Lord your God with all your strength, soul, and all your heart. But what's really interesting is what happens right after that. It does not talk about the priest or the temple or what we would consider the pastor or the church. The very next thing, it talks about the home. And it goes into detail, says, talk to your children about these things. It says, memorize these things. Have these memorized and put into your heart as they rise, as they go along the path, as they lie down. Bind these onto your wrists. And it talks about, writing these things on your doorpost. It's so much about how we do it in the home. And that's right after this great commandment. I think it's a mandate for homes to be the center of spiritual growth. And one of the simple ways I like to break it down, because I think a lot of that is overwhelming, but one of the simple ways to start is continual spiritual conversations of substance. Mm-hmm. How do we do that in our homes? How do we do that with our loved ones?
Oh, that's so good.
As everyone's scared to talk about spiritual stuff.
Well, even like we live in such a politically charged culture. Like even this podcast, right? Or anything we put on social media or whatever, if the wrong hands or the right hands, whatever you want to frame it, but the wrong hands get a hold of the words, you are subject to being canceled. Yeah. I mean, you really can. And so I'm dealing with, a Fortune 10 company that everybody here would know. I will not name them. Yeah. But they are choosing not to partner, not because they don't believe in what we do. They do, but because they think that what we stand for is too
right leaning.
It's too politically connected to, powers that, so they don't want to be associated with it. And I'm just like, man, we have really become beholden to things that don't matter. Right. Yeah. So I'm thinking about that verse though, that the Shema, and you look at that and you say, this is it. Like, this is really what you said earlier was so good, that the church, most people look at the church as a place, the center for spiritual formation. And it's really the home that should be the center of spiritual formation. Mm-hmm. And we have this beautiful, I'm just going to read it because you alluded to it, but I think, just for our listeners, if you've never heard this, because some people in the church, they don't read the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. It's almost like we've done a disservice to our people by not, sharing the continuity. This narrative of God's story from old to new. But listen, this is in, Deuteronomy 4 or Deuteronomy 6, in verse 4. Listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and all your strength. So there you're talking about the greatest commandment, right? Like that we love God with all our heart. And these words I'm giving you today that are to be in your heart, repeat them to your children. So it's exactly what you said. The first thing wasn't now talk about this when you're at your synagogue, or talk about it in your Christian, Sunday service.
Yeah.
It was repeat them to your children. And then he gets so explicit. Talk about them when you sit in your house.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, talk about them. That tells me like this is an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
This isn't like a one-time deal where I talk about it once and I'm done with it. Like, my dad had the sex talk with me once, and it really wasn't that great of a talk, if I remember correctly. And I kind of knew everything anyway.
Yeah.
And but it was like, well, I could check that off the list. It's like, no, talk about these things.
Yeah.
When you walk on the road, when you lie down, when you get up. And then bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them be them on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates.
Yeah.
Of course, Orthodox Jews literally do that, right?
Yeah.
But there's obviously the metaphorical kind of, hey, this should be something that you do all the time. And so right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I have come to believe that it's not as much metaphorical as it is literal. Now, yes, I think it is the concept of how we do it, but I think it's supposed to be both. So I don't know if you guys have heard of the idea of a force multiplier. I think this is cool. When I learned about it, I loved it. A force multiplier is anything that multiplies or produces much better results with the same amount of energy. Now, when we talk about, like, an example I could give you is a hammer. If I were to take a piece of wood with a nail in it and try and bang it in with my fist, man, it's going to be an ugly mess, right? And I might get into the wood a little bit. You give me a hammer with the same amount of energy, I'll get the job done. Yeah. And that's a force multiplier. By the way, if you give me a nail gun, man, I'll knock that out real quick. And so the idea is with the right tool, it'll multiply your effect in a much better way. I actually think that Deuteronomy 6 is giving us force multipliers. When we go back to the how of, like, okay, we believe why it's important, but now how do we do it? Most parents are overwhelmed. They do not have the time. They don't have capacity. And the other part is they don't have competence. They don't know how to disciple. How do you put this responsibility in front of them? We talked about the importance of the church to equip, but even if, and I'm convinced of this, and I've worked with groups like Awana and others who I am convinced that if you give the best curriculum in the world to parents, most of them still will not do it. It's not just about the right curriculum. It's also about the capacity to do it. And the way we get around that is what I found working with families is that we need force multipliers. And that's what we talk about. How we go in the morning. So, I mean, back here, I got one of our, what we call a launch pad. It's just a way on the wall, again, trying to use Deuteronomy in a more literal sense, but putting it on the wall with verses and topics that we can talk about. We have tools for in your car, on a car visor, where you have questions that you can engage in spiritual topic. So you don't have to think when you get in the car, man, what's a good topic to think about? How should I ask this question? How do I engage? Instead, you use all your energy into just saying, so what's our goal for this week with this topic in mind? And all the energy is taken away from trying to come up with it to just engage in the conversation. That's a force multiplier. And I think Deuteronomy 6 has a whole bunch, which is really powerful.
Yeah, I remember when you talked about the force multiplier when we met a couple of months ago or whatever, it just clicked with me because I'm thinking of a golf club. I wish it multiplied more force than it does, but I'm using it right. But you're exactly right. And so let's delve into that the time that we've got left here, because your the nonprofit that you run is it called Launching Ground? Is that the name of it? Okay.
Yeah.
Website launchingground.com. And I'm so mad because I forgot the tool that you had. I left it. I put it out too. I put it out last night. Hey, I'll put it right here so I'll remember. And then of course I didn't remember. But you gave it to us. I love it. I just think it's amazing. I think it's so practical because, to your point, we're talking. This podcast is for regular dudes. That's why we're doing the Theology for Regular Dudes podcast or series, because so many guys are like, man, I'm working 50 hours a week. My kids are in like 7 different after school activities. I'm trying to get to church when they tell me they want to church.
I try to stay in shape and stay healthy.
Yeah. So I got me tell me I need a volunteer too and help with the fatherless. And it's like, so I'm being pulled in all these different directions and then disciple my kids. which I think we would agree is probably the basic. I mean, if there's one thing you're going to do is you love your wife, disciple your kid. So talk about Launching Ground. Like, how did you come up with it? And talk about these tools and what you can go with this resource.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to say I was far more intentional and theologically sound in the formation of it. At the very beginning, though, as this developed, my sister, who had young kids at the time too, she was telling me how she put up a board in her house where it had like the letter A and it said apple, and it's very simple things to learn. And she was telling me how it's just because it's around the house, the kids throughout the day engage with it, and it's more learning opportunity. And I thought, wow, that's a beautiful idea. I want to do that with biblical principles. And in my experience, whether it was with sports, academics, business, whatever it may be, I've learned a lot about leadership. And I've seen anybody who's spent enough time around leadership principles, that they're all biblical traits. They're biblical values. And so what I wanted to do, going back to the idea of 10,000 hours to get to be excellent in anything, I thought, what if there's one thing I can help my kids develop in? It's to know and love Jesus. So I want them to have understand what it is to be godly influencers or leaders with biblical foundations. So that was the formation, and it was every month we have a new theme, which is a biblical trait, and then every single week we have different values or principles, new character traits underneath that theme. And so I built it out with a lot of the research around all of those things, where it was attributes of future success, leadership qualities, and biblical values, where you find that center spot in the Venn diagram. We laid it out, and what I wanted to do was present a framework for discipleship. And Jeff, when I started this, Allan, this was like, I don't know if this is going to be helpful to anybody, but I know it'll be good for my family, so let me do that. And that's where it started. And what it's developed to at this point is, again, making it easy. I originally started just listing all the traits, and I said, families, go ahead and take it and use it. And what parents started coming back and telling me is, hey, this is great, but I don't have time to write it on chalkboard or a whiteboard. Like, could you help us have something that's a little easier? That's when we came up with the launch pad, where you just rip it off and you have the next trait of the week. And so, again, making it easier and easier. Then we started doing other things like with the car visors and with spiritual growth journals. And we have wristbands that have, again, bind it to your wrist so that the kids can memorize it throughout the week, and it ties to the theme. Awesome. And so all of this we packaged in a very simple form, where it's all about family discipleship as a subscription. So we give you all this material, and there's online content with simple conversation starter videos, 5-minute videos that you can sit down with your kids, watch it together, and then everything from questions, crafts, STEM projects. We're just trying to pull a bunch of resources that if you have opportunity and time to do, you have it there to engage in the conversation.
It's awesome. That's so cool. What I love about it is it takes every excuse off the table.
Like, I don't have time. Okay, we got rid of
all percent of your time, all of that for you. And I do think that I think parents I think good parents, godly parents, they really do want to disciple. I mean, they've heard it enough. And they, even if they don't know the word disciple, they still like, man, I want my kid to be a good person. I want my kid to contribute to society. Mm-hmm. So how do we do that? And so, like, I don't know if are you able to like grab that and like off your wall there and like physically tell us, like, walk through some of that? I would, just for people to know, like, this is exactly what you're going to get with the Launchpad.
Yeah. Let me give you, I have that one up there. This is one of the sheets that we have. So I don't know if you guys can see this pretty well.
Yeah, you can see it.
So what we have here, and we have different themes or designs that come out every year, but the simple idea is that we have a trait of the month. So for instance, we're looking at integrity here, and what I've done is sometimes we talk about these ideas to kids and we say, I don't know how to have that conversation because it's a big word. And I've decided to keep those big words in because research has shown that kids, if you use that language around them, they pick it up. They're very good at learning those things, but we do need to define it in a way that connects with them. So for instance, integrity, we say doing what's right at all times, no matter who's watching. it's a simple way that little kids can even understand it. But we're developing kids from a young age, even as young as 3 years old. And if we go over this every year, by the time they get to be a teenager, this idea of integrity, they understand it. They've talked about it at every stage of development up until then, and they're ready to engage with it and try and put it into use. And for me, it's not just about teaching leadership principles or character. It's about understanding God's truth. And I know you can't really see this right here, but this is Hebrews 13:18. It says, pray for us, for our conscience is clear, and we want to live honorably in everything we do. So we put a Bible verse in there as well. Yeah. And then, now that's for the month, but then we go every single week. And so for this particular week, the theme was accountability. It's allowing godly people to help you with your failures and just to be guide rails for us. And so, as iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. Again, giving verses that you can memorize together as a family, tying these biblical principles together. There's a lot of research that shows actually not just 1 week talking about it, but having a big theme and talking about it week after week for about 4 weeks. It really it like helps us to understand that concept. And that's also really close to the idea of 40 days, which we see in Scripture, really embedding an idea and a concept in. And then we also have, I know I'm saying a lot right here, but we have QR codes.
We want this.
Oh, well, thank you. This is the QR codes really help where you can actually scan it with your phone and it goes to a short devotional that you can read. Again, like I said, the video content that you can actually watch a 5-minute video. And the kids, look, I'm not an expert in this. I don't know how I stumbled into this, but for some reason, the kids love the videos. I put relationships to nature and other things so it's vibrant and they enjoy it. And that enables you to have conversation throughout the week. There's discussion questions. Like I said, there's what we call a variable depth of resources. The reality is, like you said, we are so busy as parents. Kids are busier than ever before. So the reality is you may not have a chance to do any of it. But if for some reason you find yourself thinking, you know what, we have a little bit of time today, what could I do? There's a craft that we can do. There's maybe a movie and we can talk about it from the lens of this trait. And it just gives you something else to do that ties to this theme, which engages even more. So that's what this is. And again, it's every week of the year. So you can just, when you're done, tear it off. Some parents have told me that their house is plastered in all of this because they just cover, once they take it off, they just put it somewhere else. We've seen others that actually take it and they cut it and they put it into a poster frame. And so they see the theme for each month and they put them as artwork around their house. But the idea is, how do we get more of this on our walls? Because there's research. That's why teachers have stuff all over their walls. I call it the cereal box effect. That when I'm sitting around the table as a kid, I would read every cereal box, not because I care about ingredients or what it's made out of, but because it's there.
Yeah,
and that's what we tend to do. And I think that's why God said it.
Right? Or wherever you're just like, well, what's here? Let me look at it. Yeah.
Let me like men's magazine about cars.
Yeah. I don't even care about cars. Why am I reading car driving? The only thing here.
And again, that's what I call a force multiplier straight from the Word of God, because He says, write these things on your doorposts, write them on your gates. Like He told us this. Like, I'm not smart enough to come up with all this stuff. But I have found my kids memorizing, and I hear this from a lot of families. Oh, yeah, our kids are memorizing these verses on their own because it's there. That's why they've gotten into the habit of tearing the page, looking at the verse, talking about it. And that makes it so much easier for parents who are, instead of saying, I got to go and study this Bible study and understand how to figure out this time and do it half an hour a day and think about what we're going to talk about. By the way, those are good things. I'm not saying you shouldn't do those. But the reality of life is we need a slow drip mechanism throughout the year to continually nurture and stimulate those types of conversations with our growing kids.
That's so good. I was cracking up as you were talking about, like, you use the big word, right? Integrity, because you want them to learn the big word, but then sometimes they don't really know how to apply that. And so you've got to kind of break it down stuff. So my daughter, she was really good friends with the neighbor girl, same age. They put up their little like whiteboard because their rooms are right across. Combs are close these days, right? So they call it texting each other. They call it, hey, I'm going to text you. And so they'll write a message.
That's awesome.
So that's how they communicate. Well, there was a period of about 6-8 months where they didn't communicate because
she blocked her.
Well, no, yeah, she blocked her. She got blocked. She got canceled because she had that. They were playing, and my daughter was like, well, you're being a hypocrite, or don't be so hypocritical, or something like that. And the mom was like, English is a second language. And I think she really was like, thought that it was an insult. And so my daughter told me this. I'm like, well, gosh, she used the word right.
Yeah.
But she didn't frame it up like, because she was being a hypocrite. Yeah. She was like allowing her to do something, but wouldn't allow Jolie to do it. So she was being a hypocrite. But I'm like, yeah, but you don't use it in that. Yeah. That's you know. So I was cracking up as you're talking about the use of big words. That's hilarious. How our kids will like. You give it so much power too fast. I know, but I want to comment on that. And you know, we in our home, we put up a verse. The verse of the year, we write it, and because it goes. You know, we just write it on a window actually, and so it just stays up on the window.
Yeah.
And you know, we memorize that verse and et cetera. But I haven't had a tool until this came along where it was like. It's almost like these quick hitters, right? Mm-hmm. Like these quick hitters that are in front of you all the time. And if we're taking Deuteronomy 6 seriously, and to your point, more literally, you know, these things are hitting us like we're getting them all the time. I'm constantly being reinforced this verse and with this topic and with this. So I just think it's brilliant. Yeah. I think it's brilliant. And that's why when you talked about, we share what you do, like I wanted I knew I wanted to have you on the podcast because we got so many men who they do want to do it. They're trying, but they're failing. If we're just being honest, they're failing. And so how can we better get that? And this is one of those ways.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you inviting me to talk about this. I have a heart for everybody. I mean, what I've seen is that in order to disciple our kids, it's like taking our kids through seminary. And it's doing it in a way that relates in their language. And for most people, they've never done that. And it's just an overwhelming task like you described. And it's not people failing because of lack of effort or desire. It's just a lack of support and training. And so that's part of what I'm even doing, working with churches and private schools as well, to help reshape their interaction with parents and families so that, like I said, they can be the primary equippers. Because for most families, they're not getting the equipping from their local church in that way. And I think there's a lot of hope, though, Jeff. Allan, I think there's a lot of movement in that direction. And I think that is the future of what we're going to be doing in the church because it's so necessary. And it is what is going to produce the right fruit. Going back to the original statistic that you mentioned, I'm not in it for the short term of how it feels today. I'm not in it for just what it's going to look like next year. I want to see, like you said, a whole generation rise up where it's not 90% who don't have a resilient faith. I want to see over 90% on fire, in love with Jesus, with resilient faith, leading for a church that very possibly is going to be under more persecution than there is today. And they're ready for it. And they're going to be leaders influencing the world for Jesus.
Wow. So let me ask you this then, just kind of winding things up here. You know, we're on the East Coast. You're out on the West Coast, Orange County, right? Southern California.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
So, you know, we are literally miles apart, but you know, we've got a lot of folks throughout the Midwest but more so here on the East Coast, but they're hearing this. I mean, they're not driving to Orange County. So how can they get in contact with you? How can they learn more about this if they're like, man, I'm really interested in this tool?
Oh, well, the simple thing is go to launchingground.com and you'll see there's a resource there for parents. And we have our family discipleship subscription, less than $7 a month, and which is like less than a Happy Meal, right? But what it's doing is forming your kids, and it helps you to set up your family in a way that you can actually engage in spiritual conversations consistently. And it's a simple way that we do it. And what we've set it up is in a way that if you're doing an annual subscription for the year, we're going to give you all of these other resources. The Launchpad will come with it. So it's not just online, but we're going to give you tools like the wristband and other things like that. And so we've tried to boil it down to the simplest unit for you, and that we'll be able to continue to support you. And so we're building, I like to think about it, Jeff, as we're building a diverse community that is committed to raising their family to know and love Jesus. And so we're using some of the same tools together. And jump in, get a subscription, reach out if you have questions. We want to support you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I want to encourage guys that are listening, and Allan, you can take us home here, but I want to encourage guys that are listening, please pray about this and consider it. Mm-hmm. I would even argue you don't have to pray about it. Just go do it. It's so affordable. We waste so much money, like we just do. And I can't think of something that is more worthy to spend our money on than discipleship for our family. Mm-hmm. I just can't. Yeah. I love the church, Jesus loves the church. Jesus loves the church. He's the head of the church. Yeah. But our churches, let me just put it this way. Our churches, many have failed, not all, but many have failed. And I think, Santosh, you're bringing this to the forefront. We're trying to talk about more discipleship more at Man Up. That's why we developed a Patros resource. So there are resources out there, and this one, I just can't think of a more critical one. So I really want to encourage guys to go check it out. And you may say, well, why do I have to pay something? Well, part of it is like...
So it can be done.
Yeah.
Over and over and over.
Like I didn't realize that ministry people are the only people that work for free in the universe. Yeah. But it supports Santosh's ability to create these materials and continue to help us.
Because he got 7 kids, man. How are you supposed to live in Orange County with 7 kids and not get paid a little bit?
Well, I appreciate all of that. And what I would say also is I've given the material away for free. And what I found is that when you have something in it, you engage with it. And this is what I've seen across the board. Those who use it, they find benefit in it. And it's not because it's genius material. It's because it's God's word. It's getting more of his truth into our kids on a regular basis. But it's a format and it's a way, a framework in which it can be done. So that's part of it. And we want to continue to support. We have a lot of new initiatives coming out, but all of it is really trying to take Deuteronomy 6 and make it alive in your own home.
That's good. Amen. Yeah. Before we close, because we're not going to close because we're trying to keep your time valuable. But I can imagine the impact on family discipleship, discipling your children, the impact that also has on marriages. Right? I don't know why my thumbs up.
Oh, you did thumbs up? Yeah. Oh, it's because you probably did this.
Because I'm like this. Yeah. But really, like all of these statistics, like maybe some of them like tied to the church aren't necessarily tied to like a divorce, and we don't know what like marriages struggle because they're not purposeful marriage. Like they're aimlessly just doing marriage and family, and so they're not actually equipping their children and living in discipleship. So, like, for those watching, as we're talking about like using this resource, like, yes, this resource will benefit your children, but it'll benefit you. It'll benefit your marriage because you'll better understand the structure that God's put in place for you and for your family.
Absolutely. These are biblical truths as well. And so this content, these themes have been used within corporations, within staff development, within ministries and churches, because it's for adults as well. And so this grows us. And I appreciate, Jeff, what you've been doing, even this idea of Patros. This actually is what discipleship is all about. It's really that idea of imparting to others. And it really reminds me of 1 Corinthians 11:1, where Paul says, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Amen. And for a long time, I was really confused. I'm like, why doesn't he just say, follow the Christ? Like, does he have the ego in there, like that he's saying that it has to be that way?
I need to go between here. Let's go to the source.
But there's something truly biblical about this idea of saying, yes, follow Jesus, but also follow me. And it's a terrifying thing to do because we know we're flawed. But when Paul said that, he was saying, also, look at how I struggle and how I get back up. Because Christ never failed. Yeah. And one of the models that we need in our life is to see those who have failed, but who have also been redeemed and brought back by the grace of God. And that's a component we need to not only see from others, but impart to others. So thank you for what you're doing. I think it is at the heart of what God has called us to do and also to become. So thank you.
Amen. Well, we're all getting after it, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Santosh Swamidass. Is that known?
That's right. This means servant of God. So that's what I hope I will be doing well.
Servant of God.
And then Jeff Forward.
How many of these?
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us as we just covered this topic of family discipleship. Please go ahead and click any links that we'll be providing in descriptions to the ministry that Santosh is leading. And we'll see you guys soon on our next podcast.